Hey everybody, Merlin the mechanic here. Due to circumstances, it has left me to do this type of presentation. So it may not be the best just because I got to be the cameraman and of course the technician all at the same time. So I may have to do a retake or part 2, part 3, part 4 based on the amount of material and the amount of upload time here at my home garage. So we'll have to be patient on that and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to go through a basic overview and then from there we'll go on from there. There are a few flies here in my shop as my neighbors are taking the corn off, and so today's a bad part of the year, so we'll see. Anyway, so taking a look here, of course this is a brake pedal assembly with a clutch pedal. This guy's actually out of a 1971 AMC Javelin, but it doesn't matter, the technology hasn't changed. This is a second class lever. So when we take a look at our brake pedal, you're going to see the pivot point up here. You know, this pivot point to where the master cylinder hooks to, which would be this point, you know, is quite crucial. Also this pivot point to the center of your pedal is quite crucial. So this of course is going to make a lever. So if all I did is measure, let's say these two locations, you know, that would tell me the multiplication factor that I'm going to have from this lever. You know, so for this particular pedal, I measured actually from the center of the pivot point. So I went from the center of the pivot point to the center of the pedal, you know, and I actually got, say, 13 inches. I'm doing it in inches just because of the tape measure and you know, it simplifies the math somewhat, so we don't have to use, you know, if you're using PSI, which we will be using later, you know, you don't want to mix up, you know, metric and imperial. So that's why I'm sticking with this guy. You know, so 13 inches, and then when I went up here and measured this location, I actually had 2 inches. So 13 divided by 2 would be your math on that. So of course this wound up to be 6.5. So in other words, 6.5, say, to 1. You know, so whatever kind of force I'm putting on this, if my input force on this guy is 50 pounds, I've actually got to times that by 6.5. So just by me putting 50 pounds on this pedal, let's say it's actually going to come out to like 325 say pounds of force going into the master cylinder. So let's just kind of back up there a little bit. You've got your pedal assembly, and from there, even though, let's say, in our actually outline, we don't go through, let's say, power brakes yet, but from there, you take a look, and this guy here, this, you know, brake booster is actually out of a totally different vehicle, but this rod would attach here, you know, and then when you push on this rod, another rod here would be pushing out onto your master cylinder. So here's my master cylinder right here, you know, and it would bolt on like that. So the beauty thing of say a power brake booster, you know, is going to be, it's going to even multiply, let's just say, the force even more that guy's coming out, you know, approximately 2 to 1, but we're going to ignore that for now. So looking at the vehicle itself, let's say over here, you're going to see there's my master cylinder, right, and there's my brake booster right there, and it uses engine vacuum and of course atmospheric pressure to, let's say, multiply that force with the big diaphragm inside this guy. But we'll talk about that in a later date. Okay, so the master cylinder actually has 2 pistons in it. Let's say a primary and secondary piston, and of course you're going to have your brake fluid in here that's going to be hydraulic media. So basically that push rod is going to be pushing, you know, from your pedal, you know, through your brake booster, let's say, onto this part right here, which is going to be pushing on the one piston, and hydraulically it shuttles over the second piston. And of course that is going to create, let's just say, you know, PSI coming out of this line by the surface area of this with Pascal's law. We'll talk about that, you know, in another edition. So coming out of here, we got 2 brake lines coming. You know, now over the years that can differ. But I mean, you know, for the most part, you're going to have 2, right? And that's going to go to some style of ABS unit. So here, you know, we've got a, let's say an ABS unit, you know, and you'll see on this guy, I see that I got 2 lines coming in from a master cylinder, and this one only has 3 coming out. So, you know, 2 to the front, 1 to the rear. You know, so this is a 3-channel ABS system, a little bit of an older one. Okay, so this guy here, he's going to pulse the brakes for you while if you're deaccelerating too fast, you know, and get your ABS. But again, that's going to be at a later date. We'll talk about this guy. You know, he is going to, let's say, take over. You know, as you're pushing on the brakes, like old school used to be pump your pedal before ABS come out. Well, this guy is basically pump your pedal at a very, you know, high rate, faster than the human, you know, can do it. So that's basically all this guy's doing. So we'll talk about him at a later date, so we don't really need him. So then, you know, coming from your master cylinder then, you know, I'm leaving out a few details here. That's okay, it's just generalized. You know, we're going to have to go to like a disc brake assembly or drum brake assembly. Okay, here's say a caliper that's on disc brakes. So let's just, you know, look at say a vehicle here. Notice a jack stand, and let's not forget safety glasses. Even from my home garage, I'm going to pester you about the proper safety gear. Boots, glasses. Okay, so looking at this particular vehicle, let's say what we got here is we're going to have the caliper. You know, it's got a hydraulic piston inside it that actually is going to take the PSI coming in, you know, through your flex hose. So through your flex hose right here, which is the flexible part, you've got your normal brake line. Let me just get a trouble light here. So you've got your brake line coming there, and then it's going to go into flex hose, and that flex hose is going to wrap back around and actually attach to this caliper right here. So there's a piston inside there. You know, just like kind of like in an engine, but instead of the expanding forces from the gasoline and air mixture, it's going to be the PSI from the master cylinder coming out, that fluid, you know, your brake fluid pushing in on the piston. You know, and of course that piston area is quite crucial because it's going to turn it back into output force. But, you know, for now, let's just see, we've got our rotor. So as you can see, tapered wheel bearings, we talked about that. So this is a hubbed rotor, you know, kind of old school. You know, this is an S10, you know, so kind of old school. So we have a hubbed rotor here. You've got your pad sitting here and your caliper sitting here. So of course, when the hydraulic pressure comes down the line, gets behind the piston's going to push, and it's going to push on the, let's say, the inside brake pad, and the inside brake pad is going to take up that clearance, you know, and when it does, you're thinking, well, what about the outside here? You know, because there's no piston on this side. This is what they call a floating caliper. So you're thinking, okay, what's going to go on here? Well, actually, once the piston comes out this way and makes contact, then the caliper body itself moves back, you know, towards the vehicle, which then squeezes on the outside pad. So of course, that's a floating caliper. You know, the difference being if you had a fixed caliper, let's just look at something a little bit different here. If you had a fixed caliper, you'll notice that there's pistons, 3 little pistons on this side, and on the opposite side, there's 3 little pistons on the inside. So that caliper body is bolted solidly to the bracket. And so it's the pistons that on both sides that come out and squeeze, and then they move back because of their seals, they move back on their own. So that's a fixed caliper. On cars, it'd be a little bit more exotic, like Corvettes, Cadillacs, BMWs, Infinities, that type of thing would have, you know, your basic Porsches, that type of thing would basically have a, let's say, a fixed caliper like that. But for 98% of all vehicles, probably 99, you'll have a floating caliper like this. You know, so if I put in a screwdriver, let's say up on here, up on my rotor, and slowly pulled back, I'm actually collapsing the piston on the side, on the inside, and of course then I can grab my caliper body and I can move it in and out slightly. Not much, because these are actually, you know, new pads. So speaking of pads, I've got a couple sets over here. So here's my friction material here. So this particular pad, you know, let's just see here. So here's an outboard pad with those clips. You know, there's my friction material, right? And there's my backing on there. You know, so of course this guy here is a bonded pad. So in other words, basically the friction material is glued onto the steel backing, the hard steel backing. So that's a bonded pad. Now if I look over on the, say, this set of brakes, this is rather old school. You know, these are riveted. So those are riveted pads. Okay, great. So for the most part, I'll say that, you know, starts with your brake pedal, you know, let's say multiplying the force, let's say by your pedal ratio. You know, of course, brake booster, but we can leave him out for now. You know, going into your master cylinder like that. So, you know, leaving out the power brake scenario, this is what you had. If you had manual brakes, which is pretty old school nowadays, but if you had manual brakes, you wouldn't have that brake booster. But your pedal ratio usually, let's say, increases. You know, so you get more input force to your master cylinder. And then from your master cylinder, it's going to go either to disc brake. So here's your caliper. So, you know, here's your flex hose coming down here, you know, going in behind this piston. So that piston, the square area of that piston is very important, you know, because this guy's going to put out output force. So we're putting force into the master cylinder. It's coming out as pressure. And the pressure then is going to go back to, say, to this guy, you know, and this piston in this guy is going to create the pressure. It's going to take the pressure and create it into output force, right? And so then, of course, this guy here is, you know, going to come out and squeeze the pads together. If I had, like, you know, two pads sitting here like this, you know, with my rotor in between. And of course, this guy here, like say, he's going to float on that caliper bracket. So as this piston comes out and gets rid of that clearance, of course, then no more, you know, think, well, how can that pad move anymore? Well, it can't really until it gets rid of the clearance on this side. So then this whole body shifts backwards as this guy is being pushed out and gets rid of the clearance. This guy forces back. That's what squeezes this pad on. You know, and then once all the clearance is done, you know, then of course you can get full force applied to your rotor. So missing the rotor, of course. Now the only thing it could be, for most scenarios, okay, the truck's got disc brakes all the way around, so that's not going to work for me. So I have these two guys out here. You know, this is, of course, is your drum brakes. So there's your drum instead of a rotor. You know, you've got a drum. You know, and there's, of course, our shoes. So the shoes are say, a friction material bonded. You know, though this one here, of course, is riveted. So instead of bonding, this one's riveted. But you've got shoes in here, and they're going to fit inside this guy. They aren't from the same vehicle, so they don't actually fit. But of course, so you're going to have a wheel cylinder in here, another little cylinder that's going to hydraulically take that same PSI, push out into output force to actually apply this friction material here, your shoe, up against, say, your spinning drum, you know, to slow your vehicle down. Okay, well, that's a general overview. Say what we're going to do a little bit later in the next one is we're going to actually take, let's just say, some of the math here, Pascal's law, and we're going to figure out the pressures and forces, you know, going to be inside this guy. Okay, well, see you guys in a little bit, and be patient. These take a little while to upload, and I'll talk to you later.